the story of an enterprise. Its motive, aid to Russia. 3 words spelling not only great victories in the field, but one of the greatest supply achievements in the history of warfare. At General Headquarters, Persia and Iraq Command are the men responsible for the planning and operation of the overland supply route to Russia. Here, powerful radio transmitters and multiple telephone exchanges form the nerve center of the vast network of communications, essential to the smooth running of the supply line. From the outset, the newly completed Trans-Iranian Railway became of first importance. Thousands of tons of war material were hauled by rail daily from Bandar Sha on the Persian Gulf to Bandar Sha on the Caspian Sea. This route is now controlled by the Americans. The all-British route started from Basra by river transport up the Tigris to Kut, thence by rail to Kanakin, completing the journey by road convoy to Tabriz, a distance of 1,200 miles, after which point the Russians take delivery. Now let's go back to the beginning of it all. The end of 1942 had seen the armies of Russia in desperate need of supplies. Tanks, planes, mechanical transport, food and oil, they needed them all, and needed them badly. Britain and the United States rushed to the aid of their hard-pressed ally. From Britain, by the Arctic route, the ships of the merchant navy grimly battled their way to Russia. They delivered the goods, but more, much more was needed, and soon a second supply route was in action, on the roads and railways between the Persian Gulf and the Russo-Persian frontier. The hot, sleepy little town of Basra became, under pressure of war, a thriving terminal port, humming with day and night activity, handling vast quantities of materials from the factories of Britain and the United States, reaching 70,000 tons monthly. At a British vehicle assembly unit, skilled hands make ready the tens of hundreds of trucks, which, loaded with equipment, make the long and arduous journey to Tabriz. There the Russians take over and start them on the even longer journey to the Red Army fighting fronts. Nothing is wasted. Even the wooden crates are broken down and used. In the 12 months ending June 1944, over 13,000 vehicles were assembled at this and similar British installations. On the Tigris River too, barges laden deep with supplies from the Basra docks move steadily northwards in endless procession. Here, barges are passing over the Hull Bridge, a remarkable piece of engineering with a submersible span. Up to the spring of 1944, the waters of the Tigris had carried over 1 million tons of precious war materials and food for the fighting men of the Red Army. Up the Tigris go the barges to Kut, where their cargoes are transferred to the railway system. Not far from Basra lies Abadan, the immense oil refining plant of the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company and outlet for the Persian oil fields. It supplies huge quantities of high-octane spirit for the hundreds of aircraft on their way to the USSR, fuel for the countless trucks taking the long road to Russia, fuel for the heavy locomotives hauling the war-laden freight trains. The Trans-Iranian Railway, one of the engineering wonders of the world. It strides across precipitous mountains and terrifying gorges with supreme indifference to the engineering problems involved in its building. Steam-driven locomotives from British Railways pioneered the new line, but owing to the great number of tunnels, some 220 of them, fumes and heat from the engines made each trip a terrible ordeal for the train crews. Then the Americans brought over diesel-electric locomotives. At At peak periods, as many as 17 trains, each hauling 1,500 tons, were going up, and as many back on the single track daily. The Americans now run this section of the railway, but Indian troops watch over it, guard valuable stores and equipment against pilfering by local tribesmen, and against sabotage by skilled enemy agents. Now let's follow the British supply route. The laden barges have completed the journey up the Tigris from Basra and have arrived at Kut. Here their cargoes are transferred from river to railway. The turnover is never-ending. As each loaded train pulls out, an empty one slips into its place without delay. From Kut, the laden trains speed across the flat plains to Kanakin, some 200 miles to the north. British troops stationed here and at other points on the route have the job of guarding the convoys along the 700-mile length of the road. No chances are taken in the fight against disease. This is how they combat their major enemy, the fly. Bait is placed in traps which completely surround the camp. These soldiers are typical of the men of the British Army, who, side by side with troops from India and later from the United States, have toiled and sweated to get the supply line in operation, and having succeeded brilliantly, have kept it that way. In such remote areas, time hangs heavily, and amenities are supplied to help things along. News from home is just about the biggest thing that can happen. Maintenance of vehicles is of paramount importance. Despite the intense heat, Indian troops take time off to stage a bout of their favorite sport. Just beyond Kanakin rise the precipitous passes leading to the high Iranian plateau, and the men who drive the convoys through must be equipped with clothing to withstand temperatures falling to well below zero. The arrival of each train at Kanakin is a signal for intense activity. With speedy efficiency, its cargo is transferred to the waiting trucks. This takes only 15 minutes, surely a record for anywhere in the world. From the sweltering plains of Kanakin, it's a run of a few hours only to the foothills of the Iranian plateau. Following the track of the ancient caravan trail, British engineers have built a magnificent metalled highway by way of the Paitak Pass. This fine feat of road engineering, rising from desert lands at sea level to altitudes above 7,000 feet, was done mostly without modern mechanical equipment. Landslides caused by the snowfalls of winter and heavy rain spell danger and delay. Bulldozers and clearance gangs labor throughout the year to keep the road clear for traffic. In all weathers, patrol duties and traffic control fall to the lot of the military police. Theirs is a thankless task, but without them, the steady flow of supplies couldn't be maintained. At the head of the Paitak Pass lies the snow belt. In the early days, convoys were frequently snowed up for days, the drivers sleeping and feeding in their lorries half frozen, while sappers labored to clear the tracks. But every load they took out was delivered. How the trucks were kept running then through ice and snow is little short of a miracle. Under such weather conditions, the Royal Engineers and Signals have a tough job. There must be no interruption of communications, regardless of extremes of heat and cold. The line of trucks climbs on to the summit of the Shah Pass, highest in Persia. Here the military police maintain a post. Staging and snow clearance posts and refueling depots have been built along the entire route to form a complete chain in the line of communication. The British Army now runs this section of the aid to Russia route, but the pioneering work was done by a British organization, the United Kingdom Commercial Corporation, using civilian contractors. In those days, their light lorries had to be driven over rough shingle tracks. Staging posts were almost non-existent then, yet they got the supplies through and established a tradition of dogged reliability which the Army has since taken over and added to in no small measure. From the Shah Pass, the convoys descend to lower altitudes. Human beings, no matter how tough, are sometimes overcome when, as here, they're in constant conflict with nature's most savage contrasts. So accidents do result. To this remote hospital are brought victims of accident or sickness on the road to Russia. So the trucks roll on, over mountains, across barren deserts, in the path of many an ancient conqueror, past the famous Rock of Besatu, inscribed by Darius the Great to commemorate his passing, and which later provided the key to the forgotten Babylonian town. On through blizzards and blinding dust storms until journey's end is reached. From here on, Allied responsibility ceases with the delivery of the precious cargoes to the Russians. Then, a few hours later, long lines of trucks will be on their way again, still farther north, on the journey which ends somewhere along the fighting lines on the Eastern Front. On arrival, the trucks are handed over to Red Army men, who carefully check all items before acceptance. Many of the vehicles in each convoy will return to base to pick up further cargoes. Others are handed over to the Russians as aid to Russia war material. At this remote spot in the Persian mountains, huge quantities of lease-lent materials from the British Empire and the United States have been thus delivered to the USSR. Here, far from their homelands, fighting men of three great allies meet on common ground. Music and dancing don't require an international language. Less appreciative of Western music, the Indians give undivided attention to an entertainer from their own country. So, by day and by night, the trucks keep rolling. Mr. Churchill has revealed that between the autumn of 1941 and the spring of 1944, 6,700 aircraft had been sent to Russia. Tens of thousands of guns of all kinds. Over 5,000 tanks. And more than 80 million pounds worth of mechanical transport, raw materials, foodstuffs, medical supplies and machinery. And of that total of aid to Russia material, nearly 50% went into Russia along the southern supply line of the Persia-Iraq Command. Over 3¾ million tons of it. But behind those impressive figures, while the Russian victory guns roar, stands the achievement of an army of men, British, American and Indian. They built up and have maintained a glorious tradition of service on the overland aid to Russia supply line, and by so doing have contributed in no small measure to the final defeat of Germany.